Now, when I decided to continue with physical culture and help other people, it was a simple matter of economics and real estate. There I am in my room. I've got piles of magazines, 4 or 5 feet high, okay? I've got this little path to my bed, okay? And I mean, they're everywhere. You know, it looked like New York City with all these skyscrapers, okay? My mother walked into the bedroom, as mothers do, to clean, and she bumped into one of those stacks and it went on the floor. And then it kicked another stack, and I had a big mound, it looked like an Egyptian burial mound, in the middle of my room. When I got home, my mother said, "Come with me." Walk into the room. She says, "We can't have this." I said, "Okay, I understand that." I was more disappointed that she did it as a kid because I had this big pile and now I have to resort everything. She says, "You're simply going to have to make other arrangements." So I thought to myself, the bedroom's out, first floor's out, I can't see the stuff in the dining room because I'm looking at it as this is my passion. I didn't care if they were in the living room. This is my life. So I said, "How about the cellar, basement?" And she said, "Okay." So I began cleaning an area in the basement. I built a desk off a wall out of wood, 2x4s and plywood. I had a chair, and I dragged everything down there, stacked up everything neatly. I built some bookshelves, and that's what I did. And then it dawned on me, I've got a lot of duplicate magazines because I was buying a lot of magazines. Some of them were in not too good a condition, and then I would buy one that was in really good condition, mint or very good, excellent, whatever you want to call it. So I would do this, and so I had duplicates. I had duplicate books because I would buy an entire collection to get this one particular book. They wouldn't sell it unless I buy the whole collection. So I had many duplicates. And I thought, well, I've got to like thin out the herd here. And I said, well, if Angela Yuspa and Frank Thompson, and there was one other guy, his name, Wayne Galash out of Melbourne, Australia. He's still around, and he was famous for his DVDs during the 60s and 70s of Arnold and Zane, etc. He was also a collector, and what I did is I said, I can do that. I can do that buy, sell, trade. I can plop down that whopping $3. It was $1 a line for a classified ad in Iron Man. So I had a 3-line ad. I didn't want to, really tell them too much here. And as a El Cheapo, I was, it's going to be a seat-of-the-pants operation to start out with. My mother had a manual typewriter, if anybody knows what that is, or wants to admit they know what it is. And I got some of my mother's white paper, and I got half a box of envelopes, and I went to the post office and got a roll of 6-cent stamps, 6 cents. And I was in business. I thought this is great, and I could hardly wait. Perry Raiders magazine came out every 2 months, and I was clawing at the bit to wait for that ad to hit the newsstands.
So you put your first ad in Perry Raiders Iron Man?
In Perry Raiders Iron Man.
And when was that?
I want to say 1969.
Okay.
If you go look at, and I used to know the issue, month, volume number, and what have you, but that was the turning point. And I was pacing the floor, waiting for that first, please send me your catalog.
Now, the interesting thing is, this is right about the same point in time that I buy my first issue of Perry Raiders Iron Man. And it's the one, it has Arnold Schwarzenegger on the cover in a semi-relaxed pose. There's part 1 of the Essential Exercises by Bradley J. Steiner.
5-part series.
4-part series.
4-part.
4-part series. That was part 1, and that was the magazine that just opened my eyes like no other. It just made all the difference in the world. So The point being, I started reading Iron Man right at almost exactly the same point in time that you started advertising in Iron Man, which is kind of an interesting coincidence.
Yes.
So what was the response? Did you have anybody send in their, did you ask people to send you a self-addressed stamped envelope for the return, or how did you do this?
I wouldn't swear to it. I may have done that in the beginning. I know I didn't do it all the time. Some of the guys did. But I did start to get a response. Now you have to keep in mind the circulation of Perry Raiders magazine. Perry Raiders magazine, for the most part, could only be had by subscription. And it came out bi-monthly, that means every 2 months, so you had 6 issues a year. Okay? And it was $5 when I started, because I got I went on the 2-year plan, I got 12 issues, and I believe it was $5, okay, for 2 years. And I think it was $3 for 1 year. But you could not find it on the newsstand. I rarely ever saw it on the newsstand until later years after it changed hands. It could be found in a health food store. That's how I stumbled across it. And of course by subscription. So if you talk to anybody in the magazine business, whatever your subscription, that means you're paying customers, okay? I want to buy that magazine. I don't want to give it to me. I don't want it free sitting in a dentist office or something. I want it because I'm showing you that I want it. I have the desire. I'm buying it. So his subscriptions, probably at that time, I'm guessing were probably around 20,000. Okay, in his heyday, the very most when he peaked out, I was told, and I believe I read in the magazine because he used to post it in his magazine. I believe it could have been as high as 35,000, but it wasn't that when he sold the magazine in 1986. What he was suffering from is what they call diminishing returns in business. What was happening is he was having more people not resubscribe or subscribe newly than people signing up. So you're having a problem there. It was shrinking, okay, for all practical purposes. And so I started getting like 3 or 4 responses a day, and I couldn't wait to get my little catalog, which consisted of an 8.5 by 10 sheet of paper, printed both sides. I think I had 2 of them, and I would staple them, and I would fold it up, put them up in a number 10 envelope. I had a rubber stamp for my name and address on the outside cover, and that's what I would send, and put my 6-cent stamp on it, and away we go. And the months following, people would say, start picking up the magazines and stuff like that. I was selling magazines 50 cents a piece. Keep in mind the economic climate and what people were earning at the time. Books, $4 or $5, okay? These were mainstream books. The rare books were, of course, much more. I would go to the library. In the library at that time, this is before the internet, keep in mind, they had 2 big books, red books that stood about this thick, okay? One was all the publications by author, last name, all the publications currently printed by title. And so I would go through all these, and they would also have them according to, there was a way you could cross-index, say you want to look up fitness, weightlifting, bodybuilding, stuff like that.
You're talking about books in print.
Books in print, yeah. Currently available at a bookstore or whatever. In other words, you could order from the publisher. And I looked at some of these books. Some of them were textbooks. There was one called Weight Training by a Frank, I want to say Brown. And it was used in colleges. Very, very basic. Very, very, one size fits all. but it was a book on weightlifting. The reason I did that is I wanted to be current as well as relevant, that people could see the comparison as well as the old stuff. Now, how many books do you think were currently printed at that time in around 1970? I could count them on both hands and probably have a finger or two left over. This was before 1974 when a landmark book hit the newsstands and publishers. Simon & Schuster took a chance on a book based on a movie called Pumping Iron. Black book, and I believe the original had Ed Corney on the cover. Later, had other people on the cover, and this took off. And of course, I bought a case of those, and then another case, and another case. It was a very popular book because it had Arnold on it. And then shortly after that, with the advent of Pumping Iron, Stay Hungry is also another movie. Gave it widespread publicity. This was supposed to be a documentary about bodybuilding. Well, I'll use that term loosely. They may not, but I do, as far as a documentary. But more importantly, later on, we hadn't hit the part where the untapped market, and that is in the late 70s, when they saw that Arnold was doing Pumping Iron. They had the movie stars out in California, and they began with something called aerobics. And there was a lady, Jane Fonda, began with the, I think she was the first to come out with the VHS tapes on aerobics. And then the other Hollywood stars, they jumped on the Me Too wagon, and they start publishing books. Anybody who was anybody out there but looked pretty, they would say, look, this is how I got this body, I did this exercise. Well, keep in mind that these ladies may or may not have ever touched a dumbbell. They had perfect genetics. They had, there was no Photoshop back then, but they had makeup, their clothing, the personal trainers, plastic surgery, etc. And then something happened where they began you not only had the bodybuilding contest for men, but you began the bodybuilding contest for women with Miss Olympia. Rachel McLish was the first one, and that really opened up a market. Now, many of the gyms had the female clientele coming in, and that was something that had to be contended with as far as comfort zone on both people. And the magazines began selling a tremendous amount of not only protein supplements, but clothing. Because women, whenever they endeavor any activity, they want to look the part. It's like a swimsuit that never gets wet. So these ladies would go and they would buy all sorts of clothing, accessories, and what have you that any of these ladies did, for example, with the previously mentioned aerobics. And that was something that really, Joe Reader, his magazine probably increased in number of pages by half. That's when his magazine really started to become a catalog.
So you really got into the business side of things at just about the time that they were taking off.
Oh yeah, and you have to remember there was something else that was all new and was groundbreaking, and that was a gentleman that was famous for his television show with the animals and what have you. The man that would capture animals and bring them over to this country and sell to various zoos and what have you, and that was Arthur Jones. Arthur Jones had been toying with, he had an interest in bodybuilding for many, many years. He came from he was dirt poor, he's from Arkansas, And he, many of the people in his family were you know, medical doctors. He was very intelligent, and he toyed with the idea of a varying cam on the exercise machine. And he launched his first machine, I believe, around 1970. But more importantly, there were a couple of publications that he wrote, and he had Perry Rader print for him. And that was the Nautilus Bulletin 1 and Nautilus Bulletin 2. And I think the Nautilus Bulletin 1 was a white soft cover, and 2 was a yellow soft cover, and 1 sold for $4 and 2 sold for $5. And I bought them by the case. And for the first, I want to say, 3 or 4 years of my business, from 69 to say 73, 74, until of course Pumping Iron came out, that was probably my best seller for currently available training publications. Immensely important. It was the birth or it was birth of the popularity of high intensity training. And the most important thing to keep in mind here is he exploded a lot of the myths, especially on the high volume training. His idea was 2 sets to failure. That is it in a nutshell. 2 sets to failure of basic bodybuilding, weight training exercises. Now, prior to that, and I'm sure Brooks probably remembers this, if you bought a set of barbells, you were lucky to get any type of training information with them. And usually the training information was very genetic. It was an ersatz example of train Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they would usually give you approximately 9 exercises with barbell, with an adjustable plate loading barbell and dumbbells. And they would also, they give you some diet information, tell you to sleep 9 hours a night, and they would tell you they might start you out on 1 set of 8 and progress up to 12, and then drop it back down to 8 and add, say, 5 pounds or what have you. And then later on, after that, maybe you do that for the first month. Then the following month or 3rd month, you would do 3 sets of 8, working your way up to 12 and what have you. And that essentially was it. But Arthur Jones said 2 sets was maximum. That was it. And everybody, you know, said he's crazy. You know, nobody likes change and what have you. I remember I thought it was very funny because we had several gyms near Detroit, and I knew a few of the owners. The thing was interesting about this is something new comes on the market, equipment-wise, and for whatever reason, Arthur Jones selected Perry Rader's Ironman to advertise his product and his information about training. And his articles were very popular. A lot of the gyms, believe it or not, became so impressed with this Nautilus machine and Arthur Jones' explanation for it and training methods and what have you, that they started eliminating free weights. The dumbbells, the plates, and what have you were going out. The Nautilus machines were coming in. These were going to be the new horizon. This is going to replace the old-fashioned, heretofore, barbell. And 2 things happened. You had a lot of people come in there, try them out. Some people liked them, some didn't. You never saw very many women use the Nautilus machines. Now, this was in the early 70s. Remember what I said about 1970, approximately around 1977, 78, women coming in. Women wanted to get into the gyms. These same gyms were getting rid of the adjustable barbells and dumbbells, you know, up and down the rack, variable weights. They were going. Women wanted those. So many of these gyms had to go out and buy all that equipment again. But many of the gyms split. They would have either two facilities where they had men here and women next door, or they would have men's night and women's night. This is how they approached the problem. Now, with Arthur Jones, even to this day, I hear a lot of people beat up on Arthur Jones and high intensity that doesn't work and what have you. I think that's a partial truth, okay? Be very careful of anybody who gives you a blanket statement. High intensity doesn't work. Well, it may not work for everybody. CrossFit doesn't work. It may not work for everybody. There are some people that thrive on it, okay? And again, Brooks seems to think that I'm charitable and what have you when it comes to, you know, criticizing and stuff like that. I look at everything from the standpoint of where it is going and how it helps certain individuals, okay? I remember not long ago, 20, 25 years ago, you couldn't find a kettlebell anywhere. Were there kettlebells in the early 20th century? Sure. The Good brothers, Harry Good, when he was writing for Strength and Health magazine, he advertised solid kettlebells, but they didn't take off. The only training information was an article here and there in the magazine that would tell you how to swing the bell, and the exercises were very limited. So without the exercises, without how do I use this kettlebell, you know, there it is. Oh, it'll make you big and strong. It'll give you flexibility or whatever you want to, you know, whatever you want to call. You know, it doesn't make any difference if you don't give the training information like Arthur Jones gave for his piece of equipment, the Nautilus cam. He gave specific instructions on how to use his equipment in 2 books, and then several articles in Ironman magazine, and then several other individual brochures that he would give to the various gym owners when he was selling the equipment throughout the country. So the information was there. It wasn't there with a kettlebell. I had a friend of mine that I knew through my business that was in the service in 1959 in the Eastern Bloc. He was near that border, and he was able to obtain a genuine kettlebell. And he visited me with that kettlebell, and I'm looking at it, and it was a globe, had a flat bottom, and the handle was straight up and rounded. And it was wasn't very thick, it was about 5/8 of an inch. And if you rolled it over on the bottom, you could see where the bottom, on the flat part, it was machined out. And that was to make sure that the weight was very close to, in his particular kettlebell was 25 pounds. He said the ones he saw over there, he only saw 25 pound and 35 pound. He didn't see, I never heard the word pood, which is Russian, some sort of Russian terminology for weight, I presume. He didn't see any of that. And he had a photocopy of a Russian booklet, I think it was Russian, may have been German. I don't remember and I wouldn't swear to it, but it only gave maybe half a dozen or 8 exercises. That was it. And they would toss them to each other and they'd take a step back if they caught them, toss them. If they caught them, they'd take a step back, and they would get to the point where they're wheeling these mothers like this. And that's all they did with them. But for me, I wanted to manufacture these, and I contacted foundries, but foundries aren't big anymore, especially with the ferrous foundries for the iron that was needed. But then it was a matter of how many can I manufacture and have at the ready for orders, because it's much cheaper to manufacture 100 than it is 10 per piece. And then I would have to clean them up because they would be a rough casting. And then I would have to paint them. And then to ship them, I would have to box them with something, you know, like York used to do, with a heavy cardboard at the very least, or wood preferably. And, you know, the cost of shipping and, oh geez, it was just too much. But I could have written a course, but it would only have been limited to the exercises that were actually done. The exercises today with the certification and everything are much more elaborate. Then they popped up. A certain entity popped up with the kettlebells, the instruction, and they were creating new exercises, and they created a cottage industry over this piece of iron. My contention is very simple. It's great exercise. I don't beat up on anybody that does kettlebells. If you want to do kettlebells, knock yourself out. My only concern, of course, like everything else, is safety. But the important thing to know is, what can you do with a kettlebell that you can't do with a dumbbell, aside from juggle it? I see guys juggling them and say, oh, that's great. What can you do? It's a piece of equipment. It's a means to an end. You know, train to the exercise or your goal. Don't train to the piece of equipment. You know, if you look at a problem and the only if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. You know, that is the wrong approach. You know, an adjustable plate loading barbell and dumbbell is fantastic, but how are you going to exercise your neck? You have to improvise with other exercise. So it's not a perfect tool, but it's a very practical and economic tool.
So you're being charitable towards tools the same way you are towards books and courses and magazines and people. As I say, he's very charitable.